Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Low Production Values Sphere podcast, which this time is very low production values because we don't even have video. As always, I am broadcasting from my terrace hideout, which this time is in Seine-Saint-Denis, which is the Islamic Republic of Seine-Saint-Denis in the north of Paris. And my guest this week is somebody who I've admired for maybe 15 years at least. Um, and that is Nick Denton, who is most famous as the founder of Gawker Media, but has done many, many interesting things and has many interesting thoughts. And the reason why I admired Nick so much at a distance, and then we got to know each other, is because I grew up in a French media ecosystem, which was so closed down and um, so sort of controlled by a very small network of people who basically decided what the party line would be on any given week, that the sort of blogging revolution that you had such a role in starting felt incredibly liberating. So I wanted to talk to you. I know you've been doing other podcasts on, the state of the world and where you see things as a businessman and investor, and I want to talk about that. But what I've always wanted to ask you about is how you saw things evolving from the inside, how you saw the way that, blogging, which is a very retro term now, sort of changed the way American discourse happened and eventually global discourse happened. Did you I'm going to start with a provocative phrase. Did you think that it would get so weird and so strange when you started Gawker?
We were all, I mean, I think all of us were way more idealistic back then. So, we totally all saw some better version of the truth emerging from open discussion on the internet, that where, experts who had been ignored by their organizations would be able to persuade just through the sheer power of their arguments, and that the information would rise up and connect and get to where it was needed. So I think back then it was like an entirely different situation. But we absolutely saw the discussion systems, software systems evolving, and correcting the mistakes that you could see were emerging already, and getting us to some kind of digital utopia. And well, obviously that didn't happen.
So what went wrong? What do you think went wrong?
I mean, I think that we're going to go straight to the core of things, but the metrics, that was a lure. It was a lure for individual writers. Just automatically, they'd be checking their numbers, and it was a lure for systems designers like myself to connect up writers directly with an incentive system. So for them to be able to kind of measure the response of the audience kind of in real time, and to adjust what they were doing in the light of that data. So a tight feedback loop. And that worked, but you can argue that it worked rather too well, and drove the Gawker writers mad at some point, and drove the whole world mad now.
Yeah, I mean, you were famous or infamous for having, I believe, a screen at the Gawker headquarters that showed live each writer's performance.
Uh-huh.
Um, is that true?
Well, it was. I mean, it was each story.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was basically a real time leaderboard. It was, basically like those chart beats, top stories
Right.
that a site would have.
Chart beats.
Um, but this being tied to compensation too. So
Yes. Yes.
so whoever is up at the top of the board is going to get a bigger bonus that month, and
Right.
a substantially larger bonus. And I was congratulating myself on the elegance, simplicity, cleverness of this whole design. Whereas, especially with my background in derivatives and rogue traders, I should have been rather more alert to some of the incentives, and also just the mismatch. That any catastrophic losses would be borne by the institution and not by the individual rider. The individual rider would get the benefit of a hit of a good story that resonated. But if a story really blew back on the organization, their losses would be limited. And the institute
That's a
and
very
the
good analogy, actually. Yeah.
so I should have been. I mean, I co-wrote the book on this, or one of the books on this, about a rogue trader of Barings Bank in Singapore,
Yes.
who blew up England's oldest merchant bank, largely because he was unsupervised and because his bosses wanted to believe in the profits and were unaware of the accumulating liabilities in the back office.
Yeah, no, that's a very good analogy. For people who don't know, this is very insidery, but Chartbeat was this New York startup that made an analytics tool just for media companies. And the special thing about it was that it told you in real time what people were clicking on. um and that created that certainly created incentives. Let's put it that way. I mean, so at the time,
I mean, I actually think that part of the issue. I mean, like, if I look back and I think about, okay, well, what were the critical terms, especially the critical terms that may not have seemed so critical at the time. So what were the junctures? And I think it was a lunch with Jonah Peretti,
yeah,
and Gawker was had
Jonah
competition.
Peretti, who would be the founder of BuzzFeed.
That's right, and he was arguing to me that that page view incentives. So we'd operated on a system of basically rewarding writers for the amount of engagement they got, which was mainly engagement from a core niche audience.
Right.
And he persuaded me that if I continued with this, that we would basically be doubling down on this core audience, and we would miss out on the gigantic growth that was happening in digital audiences at that time, to Huffington Post, who he was advising, and others like it, that were absolutely hungry for, not for views but for uniques, not for a contented core audience, but for continuous accelerating growth. And he persuaded me, and I think actually that was a fateful decision, because that was basically taking an incentive system and then making it the incentives apply to the second degree, the second derivative. It was definitely a sharpening of writer incentives that incented them to go after mega scoops,
Right.
almost traditional news stories, that would actually break through onto television and get talked about much more widely. And I think that system it drove us in the direction of news and tabloid news, in a way that was ultimately very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, you used to show a chart at that time that showed sort of unique visitors, and every time there was a scoop, there was a spike, and then it went
Uh-huh.
down, but it settled at a level slightly higher than the previous level, and that was the theory,
Uh-huh.
which is the way you get viewers is scoops, which actually sounds extremely virtuous, right? You're doing investigative journalism. You're not just like reposting stuff with like rage-inducing headlines. You're creating an economic incentive
For a long
for people to
for a
engage
long
in
time
investigative journalism.
it did work. and it worked well. When these were mid-sized sites, when they were basically like glorified online magazines, and it worked well. But more time that went on, more competitors that came in, more capital that came in from Andreessen Horowitz and others. The more the sector was poisoned by American capitalism. The the more the incentives changed, and then you had the bizarre situation of like increasingly left-wing journalists
Right.
whose incentives led them. The white man stories did well. like I would look up at the board, and there they would be, one or two or three of them, and they always had white man in the story, a white man in the story, and that,
Ah.
and they, and I hated them because they were dumb. Almost all of them were dumb stories, but they were there at the top of the board, and they would
Right.
and they would stick there, and they would stick there for like who were we to argue? The audience had spoken. We had designed this whole company to be completely beholden to the audience, and I think especially with social media and the tidal wave of traffic that came from social media, the fact is that the hoi polloi got into the club.
Right. I mean, okay, so this is where this sort of economic system intersects with politics, which is how we get to the broader story of what the hell happened to our civilization. Um, but there, Gawker became known for a kind of particular style, and if you'll allow me, people talked about snark, which was certainly true, but there was a kind of gratuitous meanness, and this is something that's sort of, I don't want to say it's the same, but it's sort of weirdly parallel to the style of woke politics, which is, it's wokeness is not just like a set of beliefs about race and gender and so on and so forth. It's like a style of politics that's sort of angry, sort of gratuitously vicious, and so on and so forth.
I'm sorry to break in here, but like,
Yeah.
like, take a look in the mirror. I mean, I don't mean I don't mean you personally. Like you seem to still have a modicum of manners, but like your movement. I mean, like, I'm not taking any lectures from your movement on quality of discourse. Okay, like Gawker started off, like it went through different phases. Elizabeth Spires was smart, and Jessica Cohen was real funny. Corey Seeker was too indirect for my liking, and I don't know, a little bit. Dare I say, too gay, and like so it had its different phases because it was a small site. It was run
Yes.
by
Yes.
one or two people at a time, and it would change according to who the people were that would run it. And
Yes.
the meanness. I mean, sometimes when it came to the PR people and the magazine companies and the old media, and I look back on it, and I look at, I know what, Jessica Cohen calling Joe Dolce a douchebag, which at the time was a big deal because it was I guess a stronger word that had been used up to that point in the discourse. And it was just like a straight on personal abuse at the time. I mean, now it sounds extremely tired and dated,
Right.
but at the time it was actually kind of fresh because it was saying these people who seem like douchebags are douchebags. Like this whole system is extremely rotten, and these are the rotten people who manifest the rotten system. So no, I'm not going to take any like that much like criticism of the tone of Gawker, certainly as it applied to those people, because they deserved
No,
they deserved all of that and far more. You know what they deserved? What they deserved was they deserved more essays in amongst the comic items. What they deserved was a more expensively argued indictment of this whole damn system. Like that's what was owed the readers primarily. That was what was owed the writers themselves. That's what they actually, particularly in the later years, as there was more money. That's what they were actually increasingly able to do. So actually the quality of the essays improved, pretty much, right through till 2012, 2013, 2014. Even during the most left-wing of periods, Gawker was substantially more intelligent than anything else that was actually in its segment, its political segment.
Yes.
I mean, I would absolutely claim that.
Yes.
Kyle Wagner's piece on the culture war, a Deadspin. You look back and it's like, he saw the whole damn future history laid out, like right back in whatever it was, 2014, 2015. Yeah. So like there are some pieces there that absolutely stand the test of time. And frankly, the AJ Delario Hogan piece, the Hogan article that actually brought down the company, that provided the pretext for Peter Thiel's legal campaign. The video, it was so disgusting to me that I never even saw it until the day before I was due to testify down in Tampa. Like I have no interest in that kind of gross stuff, and I think at some point I could, I could feel that it was a privacy violation. I don't care whether he's having sex with some other man and the other man is doing the filming, or the context of it, that he had some expectation of privacy, and it felt scummy having the video up, and we took it down. But the article itself, if you've ever read it, unfortunately for me, AJ Delario's gift. It was a perfectly designed case for Peter Thiel, and it was a perfectly designed suicide, like a bomb at the heart of everything I was trying to do. Because it was entirely true, the whole thing from beginning to end, and it was interesting in its thesis, because it was basically saying, here it is, and by looking at this video, you are as bad as I am. We are both. I am pandering to you with this video. You can pretend to yourself whatever motives you want, but I am pandering to you with this video, and you can pretend to yourself that by reading Gawker, you're reading a smarter version of all this salacious gossip. That you're reading the take on it. The cultural interpretation of it. In fact, you're even reading this this pseudo intellectual piece about the whole act of you watching this video, and the self-disgust that you should feel now, and the self-disgust that I certainly feel now. And read it. It's actually a very, very powerful piece, and that's why I could actually never ever take it down, because that would have seemed a complete betrayal of everything that I ever stood for. And so that's why I was up there, on the when Gawker was going on trial in Florida. And that argument that actually it was a good, true, and interesting piece fell obviously on deaf ears to a MAGA majority.
Rural Florida jury. They were
in suburban Florida, like absolute Florida. Tampa, like a total bellwether county in a bellwether state, or what used to be a bellwether state. And we went down there, and it was like, oh, like this is ridiculous. Like we are totally on hostile territory here. And any Oxford educated explanation of why gossip is important, and and why this level of transparency that AJ Delario has revealed here in this piece is actually worth fighting for. I laugh at myself. My husband Darren, who's from Texas, he was laughing at my lawyers, laughing at me, laughing at all our illusions. But when we were down there, confronted with the real majority in the country.
Yeah, I mean that's a fascinating. By the way, when I asked my question about sort of the sort of Gawker style or tone, I
Yeah.
think I prefaced it, and if I didn't out loud, I did it in my head by saying it acquired this reputation. I know it was more than that, and I was happy to hear you defend Gawker because yes, it absolutely produced, among other things, really good journalism, really interesting essays, featured like really smart and interesting writers. Um,
The world was a better place for the existence of writing like that. For the enthusiasm of Gizmodo or Kotaku, or for the love of beauty and simplicity and efficiency that you saw in Lifehacker, and yeah, like that determination to say the unsaid, to say what was previously the domain of journalists gossiping at a bar, like to just like lay it all out there, lay it all out there, come what may. I think was a worthwhile effort. And now that I talk about it, I actually get prouder of it talking about it.
Good.
Despite despite all the, I accept most of the criticisms. And I've said before that Peter Thiel did me a favor. I was relieved when Gawker.com was shuttered
Yeah.
as part of the sales process. It had performed its function. There was nothing good for it to do. What was it going to do? Join the anti-Trump resistance? Please.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you.
Like do Me Too. When it was doing, the precursor to Me Too, it was doing.
Yes, that's true.
Like the story. We didn't actually usually. Fortunately, I don't think much judgment was exercised. So it wasn't like we were saying so and so must resign. Hugh Jackson must resign. Like we won't. Like there was nothing ponderous like that.
Right.
But if there was a story going around about some movie producer with a horrendous reputation amongst actresses, like we would absolutely run it. I'm embarrassed that we didn't run more of the Weinstein stuff. We ran most of the others, but for some
Yeah.
reason we didn't do the Weinstein. Um,
Um, yeah, I mean, the story I used to say to defend Gawker had to do with Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who in France, in the chattering classes of France, was known to be a rapist.
it's a
Like
pig, a pig,
everybody knew,
total pig.
and not
Uh,
just a
uh,
not just a pig, but like you know a man who would invite women for quote unquote job interviews to like a special apartment that he rented for that purpose and didn't let them leave.
Wasn't that the huge orgy in Lille with like tons of
Yes.
prostitutes or all that
Yes.
kind of stuff?
And yes, and they would like and when, I mean, I'm trying to keep this a family friendly
Okay,
podcast, but
so, well,
when women didn't want
you
to
brought him
perform
up,
certain sex acts, they would
not
hold them
me.
down, and like all of that was real and very well known. And like
Uh-huh.
I knew a girl who'd been assaulted by Strauss-Kahn. I knew a journalist who had gotten another girl to testify on the record and was told literally, if you ever want to work again as a journalist,
Uh-huh.
A, we're not publishing the story, and B, if you ever want to work again as a journalist, you will not pitch that story to other newspapers.
Well, it sounds very Weinstein-like.
Right. And so, coming from that environment, uh, reading Gawker felt like a liberation. And so, I hope you won't mind telling me that me telling this story. And if you want, I'll edit it out. But I remember you and I had lunch in Paris, sort of. I mean, I don't want to say shortly after, but after. Uh,
When I was back in Europe in 2017. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
after you lost Gawker, and you seemed sort of very liberated in a very admirable sort of Zen way, but also sort of extremely regretful, or I mean, you you know, you, you I was happy to hear you defend Gawker right now, because back then you wouldn't defend it, or almost wouldn't. So it's nice to hear this sort of balance of views, because I do think that it's the legacy of Gawker is complicated. Like it was both. It was both this sort of
I don't think it's that complicated. Like it had its share of uh, of kind of breakthrough stories and insights, and mess ups. It had its share throughout, but the I think social media plus Slack, plus we actually had a factor of moving all of three sites, Gawker, Deadspin, and Jezebel. We moved all the writers into one open plan office, basically
right.
like a school library. And so they're all slacking each other. They're tweeting to their friends in other publications, and they are absolutely at the center of the media ecosystem in the new media ecosystem in New York. They're totally connected with instant feedback
Yeah.
from stats and comments and tweets and uh, messages and everything. Just intensely connected, and it's extremely unhealthy.
Right.
That newsroom went mad between 2012 and 2015. Not the writers who were remote; they were pretty much immune. They didn't really
That's
understand.
interesting.
They didn't understand what was going on. The
That's interesting.
Lifehacker,
That's
Kotaku
fascinating.
writers just they didn't know what was going on. And then in the middle of it, you also had the unionization, which I won't say was part of derangement, but it was definitely part of a strong left wing swing, which pretty much removed my power over editorial matters, until I reasserted it in 2015.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what happened, and that's kind of why I think I recognize what's happening to Musk right now.
Oh,
um,
interesting. Interesting.
and for that matter, the whole administration, because I think they are all being pulled down into an online vortex.
They're too
Um,
online. That's what you think's happening.
and I think the whole damn empire is being sucked down this vortex, or all to as I said, I think semaphore, like just all to satisfy 500 nuts on Twitter. Um,
Okay, well, okay, so talk about that. Talk about how that happened to Gawker, and talk about the parallels you see with what's happening now with Elon and the Trump administration, because I think that's fascinating.
well, I think I already have talked about what happened to Gawker, which is that there was a complete disconnect between the Gawker audience, or the ecosystem in which Gawker operated, and the public, and then at the trial that became extremely evident, because what we thought was funny, the jury found revolting.
Yeah,
In what we thought intelligent, they found perverted.
right.
So like complete cultural disconnect, and it's not even with just with MAGA. I mean, I think all but two on the jury were Republican leaning, I think. But the jury forewoman was an NPR listening, intelligent Democratic voter, moderate Democrat, um,
And she
and
still hated you.
and she was disappointed in me. That she was
Right.
disappointed that like a pedigreed a Brit,
Englishman.
pedigreed Englishman who talked so nicely, could have actually stooped to publish something so low. And she was right. My mom would have been disappointed. Absolutely.
Right.
So that was the measure of the cultural gap. Here's this thing that at least a goodly proportion of your audience are cheering on, and they're certainly cheering on with their clicks.
Right.
And then you actually you meet face to face. You know, you actually see them face to face, and your lawyer is trying all this First Amendment bullshit, which is passing right over them. You know, so they, all the old, democratic traditions. You know, 12 Angry Men, all this kind of, just like all that side of American culture is clearly completely irrelevant. And this is just it's plain old, you know, culture gap. It's a plain old culture gap. And I think this is a plain old culture gap that the online right is now about to experience.
All right. Well,
The
talk about that, because I mean, I agree with you certainly to an extent. Like, it's certainly true that the people who are now running the administration are very online, and it's certainly true that I believe there's a risk there. Obviously, because
the
the
risk
mainstream of
it's
the
it's
country is not the
you're
MAGA internet right, and
you're already deep in. Like the risk, the risk was like that's a long time ago. Like any juncture was any path out of this was a long time ago. I mean, like right now, unless you nuke X, nuke the servers. A malevolent AI has originated, has emerged from within us. It is here, right? I'm looking at it right now. It is X. X is an intelligent amalgam, of the angriest people on the planet. What do you think? What do you think X? What do you think XAI is going to be like? What kind of AI are we birthing here? You put all the angriest
yeah,
people on the planet, the ones most
yeah.
betrayed, the ones that are most suspicious of any official information. You put all of those people into one place. You network them. You add an AI layer on top of it. You put a ketamine, to quote one of your politicians, a ketamine addicted buffoon uh, in charge of the reform of your federal government, and now God knows what position he's going to be, sort of sniping at the administration from X. It's a disaster. It's not a risk of disaster. It's like a disaster right now. And I think the market is finally, it's finally kind of woken up to it. It began to wake up, whatever, 3 days after the DeepSeek drop, with the Nvidia repricing, and now now I think the markets realize that no, the old equations don't work. The dollar might still decline, despite these tariffs. So the 2018 playbook, clearly the circumstances are different. These tariffs are amateurishly put together. Like any McKinsey consultant who came up with this as a as a plan would be fired. Like,
Yes.
it's just not competent. Plainly not competent. And the smart people on the tech right are recognizing that. I think they are distancing themselves extremely rapidly. Just like look at all the silence. Look at all the people who are look at all the people who are well away from this mess. Where is Peter Thiel? Where is he? Is he in New Zealand? Like, is he in New Zealand trading China stocks, shorting the U.S. market through through intermediaries, like shell companies? I mean, you have to stay well away from that stuff. Very dangerous. Very dangerous. All that information, and a degree of detachment. He must be in the greatest position any trader has ever been in all of human history right now. No official obligations to hold him back. If the whole thing goes pear shaped, he can always just disown Vance. Vance was basically the hillbilly son that went awry. It was an attempted adoption. It didn't work out. Incompatible with genetics. Peter Thiel right now. That somebody needs to ask him some questions. I've got some questions for him right now.
Well, maybe one day he will come on this podcast, and I will, if and when he does, I will definitely ask you to submit questions.
Well, I just did. I
What,
just did.
one of my fantasies is to do a joint Nick Denton Peter Thiel interview. Maybe one day.
You know, I offered that to him. Did I offer it to him, or I was going to suggest it? It was basically like, you know, let's. I think it was. I think it was. I suspected that he was the guy behind the lawsuits.
Yeah, yeah. You sort of began to
And
suspect
so
it.
I emailed him, and what was it? It's like, you know, the common enemy is stagnation. It's,
Yeah.
it's basically like, why are we fighting? Why are we fighting? I mean, I guess that was the real question. Like, why cannot this be resolved? Like, why are we fighting? Who is the enemy here? Like, what is the enemy here? But I think that's been the story of America, is that, maybe Matt Iglesias and Joe Lonsdale, everybody from the hard right to the sensible social democrats, like, no, everybody knows kind of what needs to be done, but the factions are so, everyone's so deeply embedded in their factions, and the bitterness is so great, that there's no possibility of people coming together in some orderly reform at the moment. I think that's the reason for my ultimate bearishness on the states. Is just
Right.
that you just cannot see people coming together. You can't even see people coming together within the Trump coalition. That they are falling apart. That they are fragmenting as we speak. Like, there is no way that any reform or even any orderly debt restructuring is getting done.
So okay, so that's the next question. Like, you think the American empire is on its way out, essentially?
America's already withdrawn from Southeast Asia. Did you not notice? Already, China sent a small fleet all the way around Australia, and there
Oh,
was
I did not know this. Okay, go on.
go look online. There's a whole bunch of maps, including some kind of triumphant Chinese maps. Relishing the fact that they can rub these other powers' noses in the same kind of humiliation of having boats running right up against your territorial zone. So they sent a little fleet around Australia, and yes, you haven't heard of it because there was zero American reaction. America, the Trump administration is very ready. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
there.
So
I'm letting you talk, which is
the
an
Trump
interviewing practice.
the Trump administration is very happy to beat up on Denmark, or Radek Sikorski, some Europeans. It loves to beat up on Europeans. Canadians and
Yeah.
Europeans are the favorite target because they're basically proxy for domestic enemies. Like that. Like that's the role that they really fulfill. This is all in politique.
I mean,
Um,
that's definitely been the signature of the Democrats historically, which is basing their foreign policy on who reminds them of domestic enemies.
Well,
Uh,
that's why Denmark is always such a funny one, because it's just a sign of how America, neither left nor right, just they just don't understand Europe, and European politics do not map exactly to American politics. Thank God.
that's true.
And Denmark shows how you can actually have a social democratic led government
Right.
putting through anti-immigration
Right.
measures the right wouldn't even dare push in the states.
Right.
Far more radical, much more along the lines of Singapore. It's basically we will take who we need, and no ethnic enclaves.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. That's definitely a fact. So you're bullish on Europe.
I'm bullish on Central Europe.
Interesting. Okay, well, talk about that. Why Central Europe specifically, and
because
why
they
not Western Europe?
because Central Europe, these are still nations.
Okay, so you
Po-
are a
po- po-
nationalist.
Poland is a nation. Poland is 99% Polish, and they might have
Yeah.
their vicious domestic political disputes, and they are vicious. But they will die rather than live under Russian occupation or under the shadow of Russian occupation.
Right.
And if you want to solve the Europe's security issues, all you have to do is to put battlefield nuclear weapons in the hands of Polish armed forces. Look, look, seriously, that is all you have to do. It's not that complicated. You have to put battlefield nuclear weapons in the hands of those that are willing to use them if they are ever overrun by Russian forces. The same, you can apply the exact same order of battle that applied in Europe from the 1950s on, which was that Western conventional forces were inferior, and it was expected that the Russian tanks
Yeah.
would be able to
Yeah.
defeat Western conventional forces. And the instructions were that if the battalions were overrun, that the commanders had the license to use nuclear weapons.
Yes.
It's not that complicated.
No, I mean you're absolutely right about the history of NATO, which is unpleasant and people don't talk about it. But because Russia had an I think 3-1 or 4-1 tank advantage, the strategy was basically to start with nukes and go from there.
Uh-huh.
Um,
It was a I think they
back,
call it tripwire.
yeah,
Basically the conventional forces were there as kind of sacrificial lambs,
yes, to
and
essentially create political capital.
no, I don't know whether actually that Russian invasion would have been as successful as was feared. I read there was a book by General Sir John Hackett called The Third World War, which was basically exactly this scenario, except I think it was a conventional bombing rather than a nuclear. I think they avoided nukes, so it was just like massive conventional bombing of Russian concentrations. But it was basically that same plot line of a conventional war in which Russia wins until it becomes a nuclear exchange, and then Russia collapses. That was basically the storyline, and I don't see why it's that different. Russia is vulnerable. I don't think the French should be responsible for the nukes. I think that's asking France for too much. So it's not as vital a French national interest as it is a Polish national interest or a Ukrainian national interest or a Nordic interest.
I mean,
And
we've gone to war over Poland before. The
I,
issue there is that we hate when it's somebody else invading Poland. Only us get to invade Poland.
I mean, I actually think there needs to be a proper division of labor within Europe. They've talked about the coalition of the willing in Ukraine. I think that's the right way to go. And
Yeah.
and Europe has other strategic responsibilities too. So I think you need to leave the containment of Russia to Scandinavia, to Poland, to Romania, and to Turkey, like the countries that are actually on the front line, that actually have vital national interests at stake. You need Romanian forces, in the outskirts of Odessa, and you need Polish forces on the in Lviv. You need maybe the Germans can play a role in Lithuania or something like that. But France, I don't believe the France should actually have forces in Ukraine. It's too distant for a lot of people. Let France worry about the Mediterranean. Let France worry about France should be worrying about the sea lanes, the Red Sea
Yes.
sea lanes.
Yes.
Why is this an American responsibility? Vance is absolutely right. Why is this an American responsibility? It should not be an American responsibility. It should be a French and European responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, okay.
Is Europe serious or not?
I mean that's a very real question. And thus far there are few indications that it is, although it may be shaken into seriousness, but by what's happening in Washington, which is why I actually fully support the sort of Trump-Vance policy. Because I think it's the only thing that can shake Europe out of its sort of post-historical torpor.
Make Europe great again. Like,
Yes.
they're going to make Europe great again. They're going to make China great again. They're going to make Mexico great again. They're going to make China. They're going to make China into the world's preeminent power. This is not the Chinese century. This is the Chinese era that we are we are embarked upon. And yes, it would have happened anyway. And yes, you can actually blame Biden for a lot. He gave the bubble one last push, one last puff, and here we are. And poor Trump, poor Trump, is going to be the one holding this bag of excrement, to use the language of margin call. He's going to be the one holding the bag of excrement when the music stops, which it is right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if he does feel bitter. I wouldn't be surprised if Vance does feel bitter. I wouldn't be surprised if Musk does feel bitter that they've been basically landed the responsibility for this almighty mess that has been building for decades. At least a quarter of a century. Probably a half of a century.
Okay, so brutal transition, but we're heading towards the end of the hour. What are your thoughts on the future of media and publishing? Because I know you're working on something in that area, and you're always one of the most the sharpest. I was looking for the word, the sharpest thinkers when it comes to how media operates. And I know you've been sort of been on this holy grail hunt for some kind of format or technology that allows us to have like the good bits of online publishing without the bad bits.
Look, but my view is that this that we're doing right here now is the future of media. Like having a discussion about the timeline, like the timeline that we're on, the future timeline that we see, the possible branches, the contingencies, the threads and the sub-threads. So we are currently you and I having this discussion, we are in some kind of intellectual maze. There are turnoffs, and when you disagree with me, well, that's a branch
Right.
in the logical structure of this this tree of knowledge on this particular topic. The topic might be, when is America going to devalue finally and stop messing around with all these tariffs and just recognize the fact that the dollar is just simply overvalued, and equilibrium needs to be be restored with a massive upward valuation of the yuan and a devaluation of the dollar. That's my thesis.
Yeah, I mean, well, so okay.
Somebody just called. So anyway, so my view is that this discussion is media, and the role of technology is really, and the things that I've spent a lot of time working on is how do you take this kind of seemingly unstructured discussion that you and I are having, and how do you identify the underlying structure and then present it in a way that is more coherent.
That is fascinating.
An essay with side essays.
And is there AI involved in that?
Well, yeah, obviously AI, if you do it once manually, then the AI can repeat the process automatically. It learns very quickly. And the AI understands threading naturally.
Right.
So
Right.
the AI thinks like an outliner. It tries to output as an outliner. It thinks in structured terms. It understands forums. It understands Twitter. It understands outliners. It understands structured documents more than it understands unstructured data.
Right.
So if you brief an AI with a proper, you give it a proper structured briefing, it will be able to interact much more intelligently on this topic. It will answer your questions more intelligently and more astutely. It will seem to begin with the body of knowledge that you have yourself accumulated just by the very act of laying it all down in a structured form as essays with branching sub essays. So actually, the media, as in the essay, let's say, which is kind of the fully fashioned form of the media, is an incredibly valuable thing because it is nothing more than a trading memo. it's basically an argument for taking a certain position, uh, which can always be traded. There's always a trading expression of any position that you have. So if you believe that the Trump administration, Musk, Vance, and Trump are all caught in an online vortex from which they cannot release themselves without a crisis, if you believe that, well, then you have some trades to make. Maybe some
Right.
puts on the dollar, deep out of the money puts on the dollar, for instance. So,
Well,
what is
I'm
me?
de
What
facto
is me?
long the dollar, given that my company is based in the US. So,
Well, so you should be hedging yourself right now.
Right after I leave this conversation.
Yeah, you should be hedging all your future income streams because they won't be worth as much in euros. So yeah, you should be trading. Everybody should be trading. I mean, Joe Weisenthal of Bloomberg, super smart guy, and has been onto the China story before I
Yeah,
was.
he
Um,
I mean, he's one of the smartest people I know.
Oh, he's incredibly smart. What are his? He's in index funds. He just like leaves it. He sits there. He says, "I'm a terrible trader." I mean, what he actually is, unfortunately he's a staff. I mean, he's got a Bloomberg relationship, and I guess they don't allow people to be trading.
Oh,
But that's a tragedy, because here you have somebody who's absolutely early to every important
right.
market story, and should absolutely be making making big bucks for his insight, and he's still collecting a salary.
Well, I mean, I'll
Put your
he
money
should.
where your mouth is. That's what I say.
Well, I mean, the problem.
Those tech guys, the tech guys, their strongest criticism of the tech journalists, whom they courted, they loved, and then they hated. Well, they certainly hated anything that was remotely critical. They wanted blowjobs all the way. But the thing they always used to say was, well, they don't have skin in the game.
Right.
You can't take them seriously because they don't have skin in the game. Well, okay, bitch, I got skin in the game, all right? I got skin in the game. I got puts on Apple and Tesla, and I'm long BYD and Xiaomi. Okay, how you like that? How you like that for a portfolio? Argue
Is
with
that
that.
literally true?
Yes, that's literally true. Everything I say is literally true.
Okay.
Okay, that's a good note to end on.
Yeah, we have a final question that we end
Uh-huh.
every interview with, which is recommend a book. It can be any book, fiction, nonfiction, old, new, as long as it's not in your area of expertise.
Foundation, Isaac Asimov.
Excellent recommendation.
Essential to understanding the modern world.
Are you the
Uh,
mule or are you Harry Seldon?
Oh, I don't know. I was just having a discussion. Apparently, Asimov based the character of the mule or the historical arc on Tamerlane. So, Mongol invader who basically
Yeah,
had no real lasting impact, who kind of came and went. A barbarian blip.
yeah.
So maybe the barbarian blip is actually the United States. It's basically from a Chinese perspective, from the perspective of the Middle Kingdom, of however many thousands of years of dynastic cycles, and then you have these barbarian kingdoms which usually get absorbed. The Manchus got absorbed, King got absorbed. So the barbarian kingdoms usually get absorbed by the Middle Kingdom, and they form the new aristocratic strata, and then
True.
intermarry until they disappear into the Han majority. But the United States or the Anglo-American Empire, that was basically a barbarian kingdom that happened to invent the steam engine, and then took it from there, conquered a continent, and established dominance for. Well, I mean, I guess the rise was what? The rise was maybe 400 years from, say, 1600.
Yeah,
The Anglo rise. You know,
yeah.
let's say Elizabeth. I think an Elizabeth is pretty much the. So let's say whatever 1575 or something like that, right through to Well, it wasn't 2025. It might have appeared to be 2000. So let's say
It was a good
1600,
run.
1600 to 2000. The Anglo-American barbarian kingdom. It was an amazing run. It was the mule. It basically it broke the pattern of history. It broke the cycle of empires in China. It broke the Chinese cycle. It was the event that broke the Chinese cycle and hurtled China into the modern age. So, I mean, I guess a little bit like the black ships of Nagasaki.
Yeah.
Um, so just like a shock of modernity. When all these like little powers, Japan and Germany and France and the United States, and they're all setting up concessions. They're all with their extra territorial privileges. In your great cities. Yeah, utter century of humiliation. And no, like that will knock you off your course. That will knock the cycles off their pattern. And
Yeah.
the Anglo-American barbarians basically pushed China into the AI age, into pushed China into interplanet into a it was the beginning of the interplanetary civilization. Despite whatever Mars colony Elon Musk may be able to establish, it is China that is going into space.
Well, on that note, well, I mean, that's an investable bet. So we'll see in 10 years who makes it to Mars first. Uh,
Uh,
anyway,
I
Nick
think
Denton.
I actually think that's a sell SpaceX bet actually, because I think Musk is absolutely serious about
Yeah,
the Mars voyage. Like, do not take this as being hype. Like, he's absolutely serious. That is his exit option from disappointment on Earth. To be the first leader of the Mars colony. Like, he wants to make that happen, and that's actually very bad for SpaceX stock because it's much less profitable than launching satellites.
that's certainly true. All right, we're at the end of the hour. Nick Denton, thank you so much for your time. You're always one of the most interesting people in the world to talk to with a unique perspective. And thank you especially for talking about the history of Gawker, which is a sensitive topic, and for having a fresh perspective on current economics and geopolitics.
It actually sounds like, I mean, maybe this is therapy for me, because it actually wasn't. It didn't feel sensitive to me at all. I was like, it was actually kind of quite fun to talk about.
Good, good. I've wanted to have that conversation with you for I don't know how long, so I was certainly very happy to do it.
Maybe I was actually happy to have that conversation too. Like a lot of people on the right have really misunderstood me, and I mean, seriously, I don't blame them, because they were, seeing me as the publisher of this, group of writers, many of whom they hated deeply. But I feel like there isn't that much difference between me and Peter Thiel in terms of like what we were seeking to achieve. And yeah, I guess my tool was transparency, and his was secrecy. So there is a big difference there. But I think the objectives were pretty much the same, and maybe the despair with America is pretty much the same now.
Maybe I don't know. But I mean, the parallels do sort of write themselves, right? And that's certainly a fascinating aspect of that story, which is why one day I want to get both of you on around a table.
Okay, well,
Uh,
I'm in.
all right. Well, after I do this, I'm sending a bottle into the sea.
Okay, see you later.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.